James had never seen anything like this before. While he was preparing dinner, he couldn't help but smile as he watched his son, Timmy, playing by the mirror, and decided to snap a photo. Later, when he showed it to his wife, Macy, his heart started to race. "Do you see that too?" he asked, his voice trembling. Macy took the phone and zoomed in on the picture, her eyes widening with surprise. "How is this even possible?" she whispered, glancing over at Timmy, who was happily eating his dinner. "Do you think he knows?" she asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. Trying to reassure her, James forced a smile and said, "I'm sure there's a logical explanation," though he wasn't convinced himself. That night, as Macy walked past the mirror, she paused for a moment, almost expecting to see something unusual, but only her own reflection stared back. She joined James on the couch, and just as they started to relax, the TV flickered suddenly. James fumbled with the remote, trying to fix it. Macy jumped, pointing at the screen. "James! Look over there!" But as soon as he looked, the TV returned to normal, and they both laughed nervously, holding on to each other. Before going to bed, Macy decided to cover the mirror with a blanket, ignoring James's teasing smile. The next morning, however, she found the blanket neatly folded on the couch. She rushed upstairs and woke James in a panic. "Did you remove the blanket?" He groggily denied it, and her face turned pale with fear. Suddenly, they heard Timmy screaming from his room. They rushed to him, finding him in tears, only calming down when he saw Macy. He whispered to her, "The man in the mirror." Macy's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure and assured him, "There's no man, Timmy. It's just us." Just then, James felt a cold draft coming from the hallway, despite all the windows being closed. He shivered and asked Macy, "Do you feel that?" Macy looked up, confused. "Feel what?" He pointed down the hall. "There's a draft." But everything. Macy frowned, suggesting that maybe a window upstairs was open. But James had already checked everything. Throughout the day, they tried to stay vigilant without alarming each other. They exchanged uneasy glances and decided to call their friend Mark, a local police officer, for help. Mark arrived an hour later and listened intently as James and Macy described the strange events. From the photo to the draft, the TV flicker, and now the blanket. Mark nodded thoughtfully and asked, "Are you sure it's not just stress?" James shook his head, his tone firm. "No, it's real, Mark. We need help." Mark thoroughly inspected the house, starting with the mirror, then checking windows, doors, and every corner, including closets and the attic. But he found nothing unusual. "I'm sorry, guys," he said after his search, "but everything looks normal. If anything else happens, call me right away." That night, Macy and James were awakened by soft whispers echoing through the halls. At first, they thought they were dreaming, but the whispers grew louder. James sat up, straining to hear. "Do you hear that?" he whispered to Macy, who nodded, eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. They crept out of bed, following the faint sounds, flashlight in hand. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you think it's Timmy?" Macy asked, clutching James's arm. He shook his head. "No, he's sound asleep." They moved slowly, peering into each room as they passed, but found nothing out of the ordinary. James checked behind furniture, under beds, and even the basement, growing more frustrated by the minute. "There's nothing here, Macy," he whispered, though they both knew something was off. Macy's heart pounded, and she glanced around nervously. "Maybe it's just the house settling?" James suggested, though he sounded unsure. Both exhausted, they finally decided to go back to bed, wrapping themselves tightly under the covers, waiting for morning to come. The next morning, Macy found an unfamiliar, ancient-looking key lying on the kitchen counter. She frowned, picking it up and examining it. It was made of tarnished brass with intricate carvings, unlike any modern key she'd ever seen. "James, have you seen this before?" she asked as he poured his coffee. James looked at the key, confused. "No? Where did it come from?" Macy pointed to the counter. "It was just sitting here this morning." Equally puzzled, they decided to keep the key safe, placing it in an old jewelry box on the mantel. They figured they'd investigate further later. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Macy decided to search the attic. Climbing up, she sorted through boxes and old furniture covered in dust until she stumbled upon a tattered leather diary. Flipping through the yellowed pages, she discovered it had belonged to a previous owner who had also experienced strange events in the house. The entries described shadows, whispers in the night, and even the sudden appearance of the very same key they'd just found. Macy's pulse quickened as she read on, realizing that they weren't the first to encounter these phenomena. She brought the diary down to James, and they read the entries together, each page more unsettling than the last. "This is creepy," James admitted, his face pale. They went through the same thing, feeling both scared and determined. They resolved to stay awake that night, hoping to catch whatever was causing the disturbances. James set up a camera in the living room, pointing it toward the mirror in most of the room. As they watched the feed, the hours dragged by, each second filled with tense silence. Just past midnight, the camera caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the room. Macy gasped. "James, look!" He rushed over, eyes wide as he watched the dark shape move across the room, barely visible. "What is that?" Macy whispered, her heart pounding. James leaned closer, his face tense. "I don't know, but it's heading towards Timmy's." They exchanged a terrified glance and took immediate action, grabbing a flashlight and racing down the hall to check on their son. They burst into Timmy's room, only to find him sound asleep, peacefully snuggled under his blanket. James checked the closet while Macy looked under the bed, but found nothing. "He's okay, thank God," Macy whispered, relieved yet deeply unsettled. Back in the living room, they reviewed the footage, watching the shadow approach Timmy's room, only to vanish as they entered. "Where did it go?" Macy asked, her voice shaky. James shook his head, baffled. "It's like it disappeared into thin air." Feeling frustrated and desperate, they watched the footage repeatedly, but each time the figure seemed to fade into nothingness. "It's like we're chasing ghosts," Macy said, hugging herself against the growing chill in her bones. James sighed, looking equally lost. "We can't keep living like this. We need help." The next morning, they called Mark again and showed him the footage. Mark's expression turned serious as he watched the video, leaning back in his chair. "This is definitely strange," he admitted, his concern evident. "I'll stay with you guys for a few nights, just to see if we can catch anything else." Grateful, James and Macy felt a sense of relief as Mark arrived later that day, ready to help. Together, they set up additional cameras throughout the house to cover the hallway, living room, and entrances. "This should cover everything," Mark said, double-checking the feeds. That night, they took shifts monitoring the footage, each one staying vigilant. Hours passed slowly, tension thick in the air. Macy sat on the couch, watching the live feed intently. "Anything yet?" James asked quietly, and Macy shook her head. "Nothing. It's all quiet." Just as they were beginning to lose hope, Macy noticed Timmy talking to his toys one afternoon. Listening closely, she heard him say, "You have to hide now." Curious, Macy approached. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" she asked gently, trying to keep her tone light. Timmy looked up, smiling. "Just my friend," he replied, as if it were perfectly normal. Macy's heart skipped a beat. "Your friend?" she echoed, kneeling beside him. "Can you tell me more about your friend?" Timmy looked thoughtful. "He hides when the sun comes up. He's here when it's dark, but doesn't like the light," he explained innocently, resuming his play. Macy felt a chill, but tried to stay calm. "Does your friend have a name?" she asked softly. Timmy shook his head. "No, he doesn't need one," he replied simply, adding, "He's just like a shadow. He's my secret friend." Alarmed, Macy shared this revelation with James and Mark, who immediately checked Timmy's closet for any clues. They rushed to his room and flung open the closet door, inspecting every inch. Hidden in the back corner, they found a makeshift bed with a few belongings, a tattered blanket, an old water bottle, and a worn-out book. James stared in shock. "Someone's been living here," he whispered, feeling violated. Mark nodded, his face grim. "We need to call for backup," he said, his voice resolute. Within minutes, additional officers arrived and began a thorough search of the house. After a detailed search, they found an elderly man hiding in the basement. Frail and disheveled, he looked up as the officers helped him up the stairs. James and Macy watched in horror, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Who is he?" Macy whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. The man explained that he'd been living in the house for over 20 years. "This used to be my home," he said quietly, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "I didn't want to scare anyone, so I only came out at night." James and Macy exchanged a stunned glance as the man's story unfolded, piecing together the mystery. The man was the house's previous owner, explaining the eerie occurrences and the sudden appearance of the old key. Mark assured them that the man would receive help, and the officers escorted him out. As he left, Macy felt a mix of sadness and relief. With the man taken into custody, James, Macy, and Timmy slowly began to feel safe in their home once more. The unsettling events and strange shadows that had haunted them now made sense, and the house felt different without the lingering presence of the unknown. Timmy returned to his usual cheerful self, blissfully unaware of the full extent of what had happened. Macy smiled, watching him play, and turned to James. "It's good to see him so carefree," she said softly. James nodded, relief clear on his face. "Yeah, it feels like a fresh start." They decided to make some changes to Timmy's room, transforming it into a place of comfort and security. James painted the walls a bright, cheerful color while Macy bought new furniture. "This will be a new beginning for all of us," she said as she arranged Timmy's toys around the room. Timmy's excitement was contagious as he ran around, admiring the changes. "I love it, Mommy!" he exclaimed, his face glowing with joy. That evening, they shared a simple family meal, feeling closer than ever. Sitting around the table, they enjoyed the newfound peace in their home. "This is nice," James said, looking around with a contented smile. Macy nodded, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "We've been through a lot, but we're stronger for it," she replied. Timmy giggled, oblivious to the meaning of their words, simply happy to have his parents smiling again. They laughed and chatted, the tension that had gripped their lives for so long finally lifting. It felt like they were turning the page to a new chapter, one filled with warmth and security. As they looked around their home, they knew they had overcome a truly strange and difficult ordeal together. The house that had once been filled with fear and uncertainty now felt warm and inviting, a true haven for their family. Macy leaned into James, smiling. "We did it," she whispered. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, nodding. "Yeah, we did." Holding each other close, they felt grateful for their safety, their family, and the strength they'd found in each other. They knew this was a new beginning, one they would cherish and protect together. Thank you for following this story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. What do you think was the most mysterious part of the story? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.